Well, welcome to this Catalyst 2030 session on increasing the impact of child helplines with modern technology. And I'm joined by the inimitable Jeru Billamoria, who was the instigator of this project, and we'll hear more about that, and Dee Luo, who's the product manager for Aselo. So today, we're going to be talking about the origin story, about what Aselo is, give you a live demo of Aselo, and then talk about sort of our values, the sustainability plan, the vision of the future, and then answer your questions. So that's our agenda for today. So let's get started. So Jeru, 2.5 years ago, you came to a conference and you grabbed me and said, I want to talk to you about technology for helplines. So can you tell me a little bit more about, and the rest of our audience, a little bit more about what was in your mind when you thought, I should go talk to a nerd from Silicon Valley?
Well, you know, technology is not my strong point, and that's what you are about, right? For those of you who don't know, Jim in the social entrepreneur community is our tech go-to. So if you have a problem, you go to Jim for tech, you know. And child helplines had been doing phenomenally across the world. We were in 100+ countries, all of that. But at the same time, what I realized is that we had a lot of data and a lot of things which we were always not being able to leverage as fast and as soon as we wanted. So the thinking was, and I see a lot of my child helpline members here, so I'm going to wave and say hi to all of them because that's the best. I see so many of them. So the thing was, my idea was that if we could use Jim's tech brain and the knowledge that many of us helplines had in responding to children, and we had pretty sophisticated, even to quote Jim, facilities, but if we could aggregate it all into something much bigger, then we could go to the next level of leveraging both technology and childcare and sort of making it to the next level. And then if it worked for child helplines, taking it for every other possible service. But we'll come to that later. Back to you, Jim. And that.
Well, thank you, Jeru. So Jeru made a compelling case, and as a technology social entrepreneur, you have to realize we don't actually do the work of social change. It's actually social entrepreneurs, their organizations, NGOs, government agencies. They're the people actually serving people in need. But if we can build better tech tools, then we've accomplished our goal as social entrepreneurs, as tech social entrepreneurs. So Jeru said, come take a look. And so we did about a year of research, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. I mean, basically, Jeru brought us to the helpline gathering in Toronto at the end of 2018 and said, let's do this together. So let's co-create a shared technology platform that could work for all of the child helplines if they chose it. And so based on that sort of strong encouragement from essentially the membership of Child Helpline International, all these national child helplines, we went out and we did the research. And we figured out that over 25 million calls a year was the estimate of how many calls helplines were getting. At the time, 94% of them were voice calls. So they weren't using text throughout the whole network. We figured at least 30% of the calls weren't getting answered, often because people gave up while waiting because there were long lines to actually get counselors. And across the network, there actually was a ton of innovation going on, but none of these helplines were in the business of sharing their tech innovation with other members of the helpline community, and that's where we came in. So our idea was if we could get modern technology, if we could add these efficiency tools, actually with a goal of tripling the efficiency of a helpline. How can a helpline help 3 times more kids in a few years without actually having to increase their staffs? And how, as Jeru said, how can we use the power of data to do better for children? First, by making the helplines better through increased use of evidence-based practices and learning from what's working and what's not working, but also how to channel the voice of children more powerfully, in sort of the fields of advocacy, because the helpline movement often is the most authentic voice of children because they're getting the national calls from children in crisis and people calling about children in crisis. So that's where this came from. And so November of 2018, we got this approved by the Child Helpline Management, basically membership. We put out a call saying, who wants to co-create the software with us? Who is willing to invest at least a year in helping us design this system, test the system before it's even ready to go? And more than 25 helplines put up their hands and said they wanted to do that. And we chose 10 helplines from all over the world, and they're all listed in this slide. And we want to thank them because they did actually turn out more than 15 months of work on testing, as we said, progressively less broken pieces of software until Aselo was the contact center designed for helplines, designed for crisis response. And we didn't put in features because we thought as tech nerds that these were cool features. We put in features because helplines told us stories of, we need this to better serve children, and the technology needs to do this thing to make us more powerful in following that. Oh, and then we went out and we raised some money. And so we got some early money from Schmidt Futures, Twilio.org, Facebook, the Genesis Group, but our largest single grant has come from the End Violence Fund, which is actually housed at UNICEF, but it's this fund that is with a goal of basically ending violence against children worldwide. And they actually funded us to launch Aselo in our first 2 countries. And those countries have already launched. So we launched with Childline Zambia in February and Childline South Africa in April. So Aselo is already working in these areas. We publicly announced Aselo just last month. So actually put out the word. And now we're in deep conversations with, I'd say, between 50 and 20 child helplines about them possibly adopting Aselo as their next, as our next adopter. So you're probably wondering, what is this thing that he keeps talking about? Well, it's a modern contact center that is the equivalent of what a well-funded multinational business would have operating today. So it's omni-channel, which means that whatever channel the customer wants to come in on, they'll do. Obviously, voice calls are still an important channel, but so is SMS, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, web chat. And so the idea is that wherever young people are and they want to reach out for help, we want to have the helpline be there. We want a door to the helpline to be there on Facebook, or be able to call a WhatsApp number if that's what the child is most interested in. And as a lot of people know, young people are pretty text communication oriented and a lot less voice call oriented these days. We want it to be customizable. So the idea is, can we have one powerful product that looks completely different depending on what country you're in and what the needs of that helpline are? So I'm going to be giving a demonstration. Actually, Dee's going to be giving the demonstration. I'm going to be talking us through the demonstration. But everything you see, you say, well, I'd like that to work differently for my helpline. The answer is, we probably can do that. So your language, your data collection fields, your philosophy, your operating philosophy, whether you're an anonymous helpline or a full case management helpline, the idea is that we have to support all of that variety, but under the hood, the technology is common and quite powerful. We're going to be trying to figure out, how do we make a counselor minute be 3 times more powerful? And you'll see some of those examples about how we can do that with automation, how we can do that with triage, how we can have more self-service. And then lastly, it's all about the data. And this is reports and dashboards being something that's alive that you can play with, reports that you might need to generate for your management team, for your funders, for policymakers in your country or regionally or globally. And so that's all of what's in Aselo. So as I demonstrate this, think about why this is here, because it's working against these objectives. Let's go on. So now we're going to actually do a live demonstration of Aselo, and I will be talking to these benefits as we go along. So now Dee is going to bring up Aselo, and so this is on a version of Aselo that we built to Childline Zambia's specifications. And I'll talk a little bit about how Childline South Africa had us build to different specifications. But and this is not the live Childline Zambia system. This is what we call a staging system. It's for testing and training. So there's no actual children's data on this system, and that's for data child protection reasons. So we're going to simulate a demonstration as if we are Miriam, the counselor, who has just gotten into the office. And the first thing that she sees when she turns on her computer and goes to Aselo and logs in is that there are two people waiting. And actually, someone's been waiting 19 minutes. So the idea is that counselors can actually see what the state of the entire helpline is. This is not typical for corporate call centers, but it's what our child helpline partners told us they wanted to see in Aselo. So let's say Miriam wants to go to work. So she sets herself from offline to available, and Aselo will automatically route the call that's been waiting the longest to her. And all she has to do is hit a check mark, one of the green check marks, and now the conversation has begun. Oh, but actually the conversation already began. Why? Because we have a chatbot that actually asks some demographic questions up front of the child and automatically puts that into the database, which will come back later. But you'll see that everything in Aselo is going on in one screen. And we found so many helplines that were doing, phone calls this way and web chat that way, and Facebook Messenger was on a mobile phone, and data collection was somewhere else. The idea is that all this is happening in one place. And this is one of the ways that we're saving counselors time so they can spend more time with children. So the chatbot right now in Zambia is asking, are you calling about yourself or not? Because we'll change what data we collect, age, and gender. Now, after a couple months of using this, Childline Zambia has already said, hey, can we add a different question up front? And the answer is yes. And so we're already testing a question that says, which one of the 8 language groups in Zambia does the child speak? And when they answer, the chatbot will switch into that language, ask the questions in that language, and at the end of the questions, route you to a counselor that speaks the child's language. So this is an example of how quickly we can make these changes based on this. Now, everything up to now has happened all automatically. So we've asked the questions. The first comment from Miriam, the counselor, is automated. Hi, this is the counselor. How can I help you? And then the child starts texting. Oh, and it's a call about a loss in the family. Someone has passed away. And so Miriam starts to answer the call, in this case, a text, and the conversation goes back and forth. Now, while the conversation is going on, Miriam can be entering data about the child. So in Zambia's case, certain kinds of data is required. So we want to know the name of the child, right? And so we capture that. We've already captured the gender and age, and then it's actually required to get what province the child's calling from. Let's say it's calling from the capital, Lusaka. So, and the system is smart enough to know that Lusaka has different districts, and so then we pick the district the child is calling from, and then we add the other required data fields as we go on. So this can be done during the call. It can be done as a wrap up after the call, and it's even possible. Let's say if there's a power outage and people are just taking calls, manually or text manually, it's possible for them to go into Aselo and enter the data after the fact as well. Or if they went out and did a field visit to a slum or a railway station or whatever it might be. So let's say that the conversation, and we'll be answering more questions, but yes, we are designing for anonymous helplines, but Childline Zambia is not an anonymous helpline. So we'll come back to that question a little bit later. So text conversations have a habit of going on longer and slower than voice conversations. And so Miriam, her time is very valuable. She's an expert social worker. So she can say, well, I can take another task. So she can go up there and say, sure, I'm ready to take another task. And then the next call that's waiting shows up in her queue. She says yes. And now she can be carrying on 2 or more conversations simultaneously based on her comfort level. It's up to the counselor to make that decision. Maybe that the first call is so intense that she's got to be paying full attention to it. So we have a different conversation going on here about academic stress. And so Miriam can switch back and forth. And if the child comes in with an additional text on the one she's not paying attention to, that will actually show up with a red dot. She'll know, oh, I have to go back and see what the child has said. Okay, so let's imagine that, that we've actually carried on this conversation, and now we're ready to kind of wrap up this conversation. So after we collect some of this required data from the child, the next thing we do is we capture the categories. Now, this is a particularly powerful opportunity for aggregation of data above the national level. And Child Helpline International has come up with a new data schema that allows all the helplines to basically collect the data about what their national context, but automatically map it to the CHI standard data framework. So in the case of Zambia, their data framework is pretty close to Childline International's data framework. Childline South Africa has a different data schema, and we automatically behind the scenes map the South African data to the standard CHI thing, so that at the end of the year, or more frequently, which will become increasingly possible, they can actually send their report to CHI, and it will take them 10 minutes instead of 2 weeks, because we've heard from a lot of helpline CEOs, they spend a lot of time massaging their data at the end of the year, but we're designing to make this happen fast. So in this case, this is about family stress. And so let's say that in the counselor's opinion, the child is calling about, oh, I don't know, relationship to caregiver and family health and well-being, right? And you can choose up to 3. So now we go on to the final screen, which is sort of the summary. And this is where the counselor puts in his or her notes about the call, maybe document that they took some action, maybe they made a referral. That we can also have quality control wrap up. So right now we have, would the child recommend us to a friend, or does the child feel we solved their problem? We have the counselor asking those questions, but we can also have an automated chatbot ask those questions. And it could be that the conversation is what we call one and done. In other words, the conversation has come in, we've counseled the child, and there's no follow-up needed. And so we can just save this as a contact. And as a matter of fact, that's how anonymous helplines work, is even if the child calls 6 times, each one is treated as a new child, more or less, because it's anonymous. But in the case of Zambia, they actually have a different philosophical approach, which is they're going to be managing cases. So let's say a child was called in and talked about physical violence being done to the child. So that they're probably going to open a case because they're going to want to follow up. They're going to want to maybe report this to the police. They are maybe going to want to reach out. Maybe a social worker is going to reach out. It depends on the context. It depends on the country, but we support that. So for example, right now with Childline South Africa, we're designing the case system to collect the data necessary to make a standard police report and automatically generate the standard police report in the police report format based on the data collected in Aselo. So I'm going to pause there. We're going to have time for questions after the presentation is done. And we'll actually have plenty of time for questions. So, but I now want to switch away from what the counselor does to what the manager of the helpline does, because that's also one of the key people that we're trying to make more powerful. So there's roughly 2 groups of dashboards and reports for counselors, supervisors, or managers, right? And the first is everything you would expect from a contact center. So, how long did people talk, and how long did it take to do wrap up, and how many people abandoned, and which counselor seems to be half as effective as the other counselors. So all those managerial things. And so just assume that we have all the kind of standard stuff. And if we don't, we can build it. The other thing is more programmatic data. So we can switch to, let's say, a category analysis of what children are calling in, and we can say, we can pick a time frame. So we could pick it over 6 months or a year or whatever. We could decide that we're interested right now in what are girls calling about. So we can do that. We can do this based on age range or queue. What are the callers from this province wanting? What are the conversations going on Facebook Messenger? All those things are possible. And you can do all of this as a counselor. You don't have to be a tech person or a report writer. You can just do this by changing the dashboard. And when you've got the data that you want, you can hit a button and export it into an Excel spreadsheet for later analysis. Some of the helplines that we're working with have much more elaborate data analysis going on in products like Power BI or Tableau or Excel. And so the idea is that we want to support all those different options. So that's a lightning demonstration of Aselo. Right now, I mean, in the last month, I'd say we've done between 15 and 20 bespoke demonstrations for different child helplines and crisis helplines around the world to actually show them how Aselo works for them. So let's go back to this, and I'm going to just double check with my team, but I'm assuming that, oh, let's see, I actually have to share my screen. So, John, is there anything I have to do before I keep going?
Nope, you're good.
All right. I assume that you guys will be watching the chat from me. So, okay, so let's start by talking about the values. And I think you heard a little bit at the beginning about co-creation and partnership. And I'm going to ask Drew to talk a little bit about how Aselo fits into the larger Catalyst 2030 kind of vision. But first of all, the data belongs to the helpline, not to Tech Matters. I know that's not what Silicon Valley tech companies generally do, but this is really critical. I mean, exporting the data and using it in another country is kind of colonial, and we don't want to be that organization. So the data is basically under the power of the helpline, and it's our job to keep it secure and private, and so that it works within the context of national regulation, best practices in data security. One of the things that's quite clear to us is in the next year, we're going to be adopted by a European child helpline. And so we'll be subject to the European privacy regulations, which are quite stringent. They're called GDPR. And I actually have a call tomorrow with pro bono legal counsel in Brussels to help us actually implement this well so that child helplines in Europe and in other countries can have this very high standard of privacy actually implemented in Aselo to make it possible for them to be compliant with their national data privacy law. And Drew, I mean, obviously, I like to think that Aselo is an example of how partnerships between social entrepreneurs and this sort of open and co-creation way is a way of actually accelerating our progress towards the SDGs. Do you want anything else about sort of how we fit into the Catalyst 2030 community? Oh, she's shaking her head. Okay. Oh, okay. All right. So we'll keep going, but I'm going to come back to you because I know you have a future vision that people are going to want to hear. So now let's talk about sustainability. We don't do projects at Tech Matters. We do long-lived enterprises, social enterprises, nonprofit social enterprises. But we expect that when we show up with a product and launch it like we did last month, that we're making at least a 10-year commitment to a field, probably more like 15 or 20 years. And frankly, if you were picking an accounting system, you wouldn't want to hear that the accounting system runs out of money next year, right? You wouldn't want to adopt that one. So our idea is like, how are we going to make sure that not only is Aselo around, but Aselo keeps getting better and better and better year on year? How do we do the support? How do we have 24/7 tech support so that if it's down in the middle of the night, someone gets a buzz on their phone and they get up and they reboot the server if that needs to happen? So that's what we're designing for. And so our revenue model is, up till now, it's been 100% donor funded, but we expect in 3 years, it'll be about half donor funded and half basically revenues where helplines are paying towards what it actually costs Aselo. And we expect to have something that's more of a sliding scale so that helplines in the rich world are paying full freight, but helplines that might not otherwise be able to afford this kind of technology are effectively subsidized by donors and our revenue streams. So that's our vision. We expect to have at least 30 helplines using this by the end of 2023. So that's less than 3 years away. And I'm guessing right now it's going to be more. So, but what we're doing is we're spreading the cost of operating Aselo across all these different helplines. When I interviewed 25 national, helpline CEOs from the Child Helpline Network, from CHI's membership, each one of them were pretty much, they had their own version, their own call center. And that's a very expensive way to get technology. If you're the only person paying for maintenance, if you're the only people paying for upgrades. So our idea is we spread that cost in our network. We have a very strong case to donors on why, if you care about ending online child abuse, this is a great way, a leverage way to actually make that kind of impact. So that's our vision about sustainability, so that we'll be here in 5 years operating Aselo, and the Aselo of 5 years from now will be even better and more powerful, and even have more tools for making helplines more efficient in meeting the needs of children in crisis. So what's the future? we're making investments to lower the cost of bringing Aselo to a new country. So, our early helplines, we were budgeting $50,000 a helpline to start. That's a lot of money to start. We now know that for helplines that are doing basically a text-only helpline, we can do this for less than $10,000. But we also have helplines that are coming to us with a very long list of things that they want added to Aselo that will probably cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the power of this is that when they've invested in a new feature that makes Aselo more powerful, everybody else, all the other helplines get that new feature. And so this solidarity, this joint effort, this partnership between technologists and the child helpline movement is going to help the entire child helpline movement. And again, we're looking towards what's the justification for investing in technology? Well, if we can triple your capacity, it's probably a pretty good buy. And finally, Drew had a vision of helping the child helpline movement, and the child helpline movement has been core to developing this, but there are more people handling people in crisis than the child helpline. So Drew, you want to expand a little bit on what you're urging us onward towards?
Yes, for sure. And for those of you who know me, I have to go to the next step, and that's who I am. So sorry. So as we started with child helplines, I was, of course, speaking to a lot of people, and we had women's helplines approaching us. We had disability, we had children in conflict, and so many other people. So what I am pushing Jim towards, and he's of course pushing back because I say do it in 2 months. He says it takes 9 months, but that's the dance we always have. But I think the important thing that and we all both agree on is if we could have, and the terminology may be wrong, but what we call a helpline in a box. That means I cannot use the word app, but it is something as simple as with a click of a few buttons, you are able to start something. So imagine a crisis happening anywhere, or even imagine a small community wanting to start something. Then you are able to do it immediately. So what we are doing is using technology to reach local communities, to reach different target groups, and to be able to generate the kind of data firsthand, which can actually shape policies with a difference. So that's what Helpline in the Box is about. It's a long-term vision. We know it will take 9 months because that's how long it takes to birth a baby, and Jim has told me that. But I think I would really like your opinion. It can also be used, I think I saw Dan on the call. It can also be used as a compulsory tool, and it can become revenue generation for anyone who across the whole value chain. Because if you have it across the value chain and people are being abused, then they can also call in and use it. So we can then use it to market. And what happens is the money which you get from companies can be used to be able to use it for child helplines or disability helplines or whatever. So we also create our very own revenue source. Bottom line is, you need help. You have a background helpline in the box to make it happen. And all that data can help us change policy to make sure the voices of the last mile are heard. And that's why I've told Jim he has to deliver. How he does it, I don't know.
Well,
he's the techie. Over to you, Jim.
Well, I think Drew was trying to get me to have 50 helplines live by the end of this year, and I said 3. And it looks like we settled on maybe 8 to 10. But so I do rely on Drew to make us more ambitious. But technically, my team is already going, gee, with some enlightened donor, because that's part of what we could create the ability for someone to go to a website, answer a questionnaire, and push a button, and we could be setting up a very powerful standard helpline that actually is in, and if they want it in their language, then they have to just add the strings, and then voila, it's in their language. We can imagine how to do that, but it's going to take a little bit of work to get us there. So anyway, so that's I believe the end of our prepared presentation, and so I think now we're ready for questions. And I've been counting on my fearless team to be looking at all the questions in the chat and tell us what people are wondering about.
Well, we don't have too many questions in the chat yet, so I'm hoping people will start putting some questions in the chat. I thought you might address the issue of Aselo being open source and why that is important.
Yes, and I will come back to anonymous helplines in a little bit more detail as well. So, okay, I'll tackle those. So people, please ask questions. And of course, obviously our team is on there. And if you want to get a demonstration for your team, your helpline, please reach out to us. And matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and put up some of these links.
David from Iran, Israel also has a question.
Okay, so I'm going to answer the first two questions, and then we'll go to that one. So, and then I see Costas has a question. So good, this is going to be great. So so the open source nature of this. So all the technology that we're building at Tech Matters is open source. That means that anyone can access the source code, and we give the rights of owners to everybody. So for example, it is completely possible for someone to take the Aselo code, go set up their own accounts at Amazon Web Services and a couple other tech providers, and run their own helpline without asking our permission, and they can also make changes to the code because we've made that possible. Now, we know that less than 10% of the helplines have their own tech staff. And so our job is to not only operate Aselo for those helplines, but also to make changes based on their request. And in many cases, we just make the changes. If they're particularly expensive changes, we say, well, how are we going to raise the money to make that change? But this open source nature is, I think, an important statement of co-creation and partnership. The second thing that people are asking about is anonymous helplines. And anonymous helplines are reasonably common in Europe and North America. And a number of our beta testing helplines were actually anonymous helplines. So there's additional technology work that you have to do to make a helpline anonymous, and we know what's involved because we've worked closely with these helplines. And so the first anonymous helpline that adopts, we will then put in process these different policies. For example, hiding the phone number from the counselor, erasing the logs so that we don't have a record of the phone number, and giving people different ways of doing anonymity. So, and right now, I'm guessing that one of the next 5 helplines that we're going to agree to implement Aselo for is going to be an anonymous helpline. And then once we've done the work to do an anonymous helpline for one country, then it's going to be a lot easier and quicker for the next few countries. And the same thing, I mean, another example of this is email, right? Right now, we don't support email, but there's a number of helplines where email is a very important part of this. So we're going to be doing that. So, and then who is the person with the next question? Was it David?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So
yeah.
We have a text question, or are we going to let David ask his question?
Yeah. Can you hear me, Jim?
Oh, David, great. Yes.
Hi. Yeah, it was a very interesting. I haven't seen the part of the phone line here, so maybe I just missed it by a few minutes. My question is with regard, whenever we're getting an emergency call, we do have an option to put another counselor on the line to join the call, and I would. So my question, whether this option is here or not. The other question is really practically how we can go about and have like with our tech team here a meeting of some detailing and see how we can work it out for our and to switch, because our technology is quite heavy as it is right now. So if there is any possibility of having like a demonstration like that I would have to bring 2 other people from our team here. That
sounds great, David. And that's the sort of thing that we're doing with a lot of groups. So let me tick through the different kind of questions. So one is voice calls. Right now, we do not have voice calls operational in Zambia or South Africa. In both countries, they have the 116 short code. And so we're meeting, and we're in the middle of the meetings with ZICTA, which is the telecom agency, its equivalent in South Africa. And then in Zambia, we're working with Zamtel, MTN, and Airtel, which are the 3 mobile providers. And we're working with Twilio, who's our tech. So it's supported. It's just, just routing it to a random phone number, which we could do today, is not actually meeting the needs of the helpline. We need to have 116 nationally in that country going into Aselo. And so that's the expectation on that part. In terms of additional sort of counselors on the line, our primary design feature that is the ability for supervisors. Now, maybe the supervisor is held by a senior counselor to be able to join calls, to be able to listen in to live calls, to be able to be involved. And that's also for texts. So the idea is that, for quality control reasons or support, you can have, multiple people on a call. And in addition, for quality control reasons, we're going to be implementing it so that a supervisor or manager can go back and review any transcript, review any call after it's happened. So that's again a key quality control feature, as well as the possibility to escalate it to an expert. We're also talking to helplines that implement more of a stepped care model. So you might have a volunteer doing peer counseling, but then if it turns out that it's a much more serious call, if they're calling about an eating disorder and they might need an expert social worker to, counselor to speak with, then they can escalate that call to that. So we're designing a lot of these different purposes. The last thing is that we are cross-fertilizing tech features that already exist in other parts of the helpline network. Now, there are helplines in other sort of adjacent fields. So we spend a lot of time talking to our tech peers, other crisis response groups that have tech teams. And that's been mediated a lot by the tech companies like Twilio. So we spend a lot of time talking to International Rescue Committee, or the Trevor Project, which is for LGBT youth, or Crisis Text Line, or I'm forgetting RAIN, which is the Sexual Violence Survivors Network here in the U.S. And so in many cases, we're trading notes on how to build this up. And of course, all of our technology is open source. So in many cases, we're pioneering how to do this in Twilio, and in many cases, they've already built features that we want to copy. And people are quite generous in this field. So I think that was a pretty comprehensive answer. And I see Costas has had his digital hand raised. So Costas, would you like to ask a question? Or?
Yes, sir. We can find various features. We can go ahead with zeros, crazy ideas and pioneering, and we can do a lot of things if we join together forces, one sort or another. But the most important thing is that for the lines, for the organization to feel comfortable that there's going to be sustainability one way or another. And also that what experience we have from our own little world, that we have gurus like Microsoft, like Cisco, like all this Oracle, that we had this call center that we first involved, and now it's too old and the companies cannot invest any longer. And so it goes down. So we have to continue with other ways of technology. So we can find, I come from the technology part. That's why we put together all the various big technology partners. But the most important thing is that to have a sustainable and critical partnership, like Jeru is going to do, and we have common waves in this area, to be able to feel comfortable with what we're doing right now. And of course, as a smile of the child, we would like to invest in your endeavors, in your possibilities. We're a strong helpline, but we still battle for the money. We still battle for the quality, for the 24/7 capability. So we have to solve this, not to solve, we cannot solve it from one day to another. You push, Jeru, and everybody else pushes, but it takes some time. So just to feel comfortable that we are going ahead with things that we can continue tomorrow, and the day after, and so on. So that's our main concern here.
Yeah.
On the technology and on the financial side.
Well, and those, and I mean, and there's even more factors at play, Costas. And first of all, I want to express my appreciation for Smile the Child and your team being one of our 10 beta testers who helped actually develop Aselo and specify what's in there. So I mean, that kind of involvement was critical. But Aselo right now is let's say a medium powerful contact center. And so if your contact center technology is 8 or 10 years old, or it could be that Aselo is better. But our experience with a lot of helplines in Europe and North America is that they still have features that Aselo does not have yet. And so a lot of our plan is that this year is about building those features and building the credibility that you're talking about, so that the helplines that have, let's say, who have invested, hundreds of thousands of dollars or euros in their technology are comfortable switching to Aselo. The last part, and I know this is something that Jeru knows, but I've spent 30 years building nonprofit social enterprises that can last for 10 or more years. And right now the most best known example of this is Bookshare, which is the largest digital library for disabled children in the world, and has 1 million children getting digital books that talk or are in Braille or large. And that's been operating now for 15 years and is the National Library for the Blind in Ireland, UK, India, US, Canada, and the United Arab Emirates, and another 10 countries, South Africa. And so we've been able to do that and sustain that as a nonprofit enterprise, and where this power comes together, where we're the sum of our parts. And anyway, I'll pause there. I know Christine has a question, and then I'll also turn to Joan in case there's another one that I'm supposed to address. So Christine, you're next. Oh, and looks like, wait, Drew, would you like to speak up before I switch to Christine?
Yeah, I was actually responding to an earlier question, which was about, would a helpline in a box lead to fragmentation? So I think no, because and it partially answers Christine's questions. Helpline in a box is a back-end tool, essentially. So a women's shelter is still going to be a women's shelter network. And then they will still have this back-end tool to be able to use it. So essentially, it doesn't lead to fragmentation, but it supports. And because it can be set up very fast, imagine an earthquake, imagine a crisis, anything, if we had it with COVID just now, it would have been perfect, because there are so many I was just asking Jim earlier, India desperately needs a mental health helpline for COVID workers, because I'll speak for Childline, half our workers are sick and they're still going out and outreach. So that's where you need the support, and it can be done very fast. So in a sense, Aselo would be, or helpline in the box, whatever the name is. I'm very bad with names. I still call it Toronto line. For those of you from the helpline movement know. So whatever is the name, it's at the back end. It really doesn't matter. At the front end, it would be whatever the name of the helpline is. Yeah. So it makes absolutely no difference.
And this is actually a great point, Drew, because what we do is, there's the core technology of a contact center that collects the data that you want. And so what we do is we actually meld, your language, your queue design. Like if you're in Canada, you'll have an English queue and a French queue, right? And so, but in Zambia, we might have 8 different directions it's going to go depending on language. We can make those things, one's the software and one's sort of the configuration. And that way, and then the basic software gets better, but the configuration remains unique to each of these groups. So Christine, did you have a question? I want to make sure that
Jim, can I just break in for one second? We've had a couple of requests that you stop sharing your screen so that people can actually see.
That's a great idea. Okay, what else, Joan?
We've had questions about confidentiality and privacy, and how does Aselo handle that?
Okay, so there's we have a 2-page document on all of our security procedures. So I'm going to hit some of the highlights, and luckily I have some of our technical people on here as well. But for one thing, the data is encrypted while in transit and at rest. So the idea is that we have the data secure, whether it's stored on servers or whether it's actually in the process of going back and forth over the lines. Communications like web chat and WhatsApp are encrypted, but SMS is not encrypted by its nature. And of course, at the moment, Facebook Messenger is not encrypted, and so Facebook can watch the conversations. And we have many helplines who want to say, well, right now when Facebook Messenger is not encrypted, I might switch them to web chat or something like that. So there's a number of these things. To be GDPR compliant, we have to add some additional layers of compliance and for example, notice. So it'll be important to give someone notice saying, by the way, we're collecting this data and you have certain rights under GDPR, for example, the right to be forgotten. So we have to implement that technically. There's also external audits. So before we launched in Zambia, we had an external security field audit Aselo to make sure that there weren't any vulnerabilities that might expose the confidential data of children. And that was done before, but it's on an ongoing process. So we just got a new report of things that we need to look into. Again, no severe issues, but there's always ways that we can improve. But the idea is that the data is kept secure and that it's an ongoing security process. And lastly, there's some operational things. For example, our staff all have to have criminal background checks before they're allowed to actually technically work on Aselo. So that, this is quite common in the child helpline field. You also do background checks on people in many jurisdictions. And then we're not allowed to go around poking in the personally identifiable information of children. That's the job of the helpline. Though our technical support people may be brought in by the helpline to say, please fix this bug about this particular record. But we're only doing that on invitation. So this is pretty much the standard of being a tech provider to an organization who has the primary responsibilities for the data of children and vulnerable people as your data processor, and this is the European terms, but the helpline is the data controller. They're the people in charge. So, Joan, what's the next question I should tackle?
So when a helpline decides that they want to deploy Aselo, what is the process? How do we bring on a new helpline? Does it come with training?
So here's the process that we've been pioneering with Childline Zambia and Childline South Africa, because as our first two helplines, they did a lot of the extra work so that you won't have to. And we really appreciate that level of commitment. So we co-developed an entire sequence of activities that lead from starting to actually turning on the helpline as a production system. So the first thing we do is we generally give a demonstration of Aselo, and we answer questions in the context of what that helpline wants to do. Often the next step is to get a demonstration of what the helpline is using right now. And we'd like to hear what's working really well with the existing system and where are their problems. And usually a lot of the story is we have 4 systems and can you make them 2 or even 1? And often the answer is yes. We have a very detailed questionnaire about what languages that you need to support, what's the messaging and branding of the helpline. For example, children and people reaching out over Aselo have no idea that they're reaching out using Aselo. Aselo is not something that they know about. They think they're talking to the helpline, and we're just the technology provider. So everything about the messaging, the language used, the operating philosophy is the helplines, and our job is just to make it technically work for them. Then generally, once we have that, we build a staging system, which is designed for training. And usually the staging system has, temporary WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger and phone numbers that people Skype into. And our goal is to have that set up at least a month before the system goes live. So we've learned that 2 weeks didn't seem to be enough initially of the training. So we're usually aiming for a month. We have detailed training manuals and a training curriculum on training counselors. Dee, do we have a supervisor's curriculum yet, or is
yes,
we do. Oh, we do. Oh, cool. So that was new. So so the idea is that we do the training, and then we have sort of a set of things to say. All right, if we've accomplished all these things, then we're ready to cut over and go live and start actually collecting data. Another experience that we've had with Childline Zambia and South Africa is rather than trying to cut over all 6 channels all at once, we have started them in some cases on data collection and then turned on web chat a week later, and then WhatsApp a week later, and then Facebook Messenger a week later. And frankly, turning on 116 is taking longer because we have to work with the telecoms. And so that might actually take a few extra months before we actually get that live. So that's the process. Joan, I see tons of chat going on. So what's the next question you'd like us to address?
There is a question about power outages and how we deal with failover.
So right now, I mean, this is a pretty common thing all over the world that power goes out, or the internet goes out, or they both go out. And so the first thing we designed Aselo to do is to do offline data entry. The idea is you take the phone call on a regular phone or on a mobile phone, or you do the WhatsApp if you can, right? And then you actually can enter the data later. I think we're also talking about setting up more elaborate failover mechanisms. That generally involves the telecom because the social media channels, the social media channel tends to keep operating if you can get data, right? But if you have an internet out, even if you have a power outage, you can often continue doing the work. But if the data is down, then no one can communicate. So we're designing it for that kind of a failover. Next question, John.
Can you link several helplines?
So this is a story that we've heard in different forms, but the most common one is, could we transfer calls or chats from one helpline to another helpline in another country? So maybe a Northern European helpline does a partnership with the Palestinian helpline or the Jordanian helpline or something like that for, let's say, a youth who's immigrated from an Arabic-speaking country. And so I think that it's technically possible, but we haven't done it yet. I don't know, Joan or Dee, do you want to add anything else to my answer on that question?
I'll add, if there are cases, if an organization runs multiple helplines, so I'll give the example of Childline Zambia, they actually run Childline and Lifeline, which is a gender-based violence adult helpline. We are planning to route both the Childline and Lifeline calls through Aselo. Their counselors work on both helplines at one time, and they will be able to take calls and chats through both of their helplines. So depending organizationally on how things are set up, we could possibly link several helplines.
Yeah, and we have other use cases like Zambia, where one organization runs multiple helplines, and in some cases the same counselors service both. They just need to know which helpline this is that I'm talking to right now. That the caller thinks they're talking to, and in some cases they might route them differently. For example, in Canada, the French-speaking part of the helpline might actually just route to a set of French-speaking counselors, and they. Or maybe not, I don't know. So whatever they want to design, we can build. Joan, what's our next question as we get down to our last couple of minutes? Florence
is on the call. Maybe Florence may want to add on.
Oh, Florence, terrific. Florence, obviously, as the first adopter, you are the expert in what it takes to adopt Aselo in a country.
Yeah, hello Jim, hello Julie, and everyone on call. It's been an exciting time and a very learning period. We've been so excited, and it's going on well. We're able to reach a lot of people, and like we had also visitor visiting us from Tech Matters. I think she saw what is happening. It's some kind of it's difficult to express that we're now able to do a lot of things on this on the Aselo. So I urge that in future, I'm looking forward that so many people should use this platform. It's amazing. It's difficult to explain.
Well, we very much I mean, you were one of our 10 beta testing countries and the first country to adopt. And so you've seen all of the things that we've gone through to get Aselo to where it is, and we appreciate that you've been along with us on the journey. And one of the things that that Florence and Duni Nala from South Africa, the chief executive in South Africa, they expressed some concern about the fact that because of the pandemic, we could not visit. At the time, it was because the United States had so badly managed our pandemic response that no one wanted to see us. And so we actually did hire an assistant product manager in South Africa, who's on the call, is Humera, and she was able actually to visit Childline Zambia last week. And I know she has come back with a long set of notes of things that we need to do to improve Aselo, based on talking to the counselors and giving that additional training. And I think it's not just the initial training that goes on. We're expecting to keep adding new features and train people. So I know we're at 1 minute before the hour. I know that there are more questions and comments that have come up. But I just want to express our thanks to partnering with the Child Helpline movement in building a digital public asset that we think will not only benefit dozens of child helplines around the world, but actually probably end up benefiting over the next 5 years hundreds of crisis response organizations. And it's based on the pioneering attitude of adopting sort of very current technology, cloud-based technology, Amazon and Twilio being the key pieces of technology that we're building on top of. And we're going to get tremendous cost advantages and great benefits in terms of technology. I mean, I haven't begun to talk about machine learning and AI, and that's my background. But I think right now, a lot of this is about having, a technology that works well, that collects data under the control of the helpline, and start building a better response system for children in partnership with the crisis response and the child helpline movements. So, Drew, do you have any final comments before we sign off?
No, only to say that it would be great if we can have as many helplines up and have maybe at next year's Catalyzing Change, we have helpline in the box demo. All
right, Drew, let's go up and raise that money because we can build it. All right, thank you, everybody, and thank you to all the helplines that came today.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.